I've been keeping sketchbooks for quite a long time, as many artists do, both so-called amateur and professional. But in this video, I want to show you my worst sketchbook, which is this one. One of my worst sketchbooks, the 1977 broken, aging sketchbook, now battered over the years, from 1977. I was 18 years old. And it might be a little bit of a sentimental video, but it's about my journey. We each have one, personal to us. This book is kind of a touchstone. And when I open the pages, it reminds me, each page, it reminds me of the long journey I've had through having a professional art career, I guess for almost 50 years. Something like 48, depending on when you measure the beginning of it. But I'm making this kind of video in the hope that it encourages anybody who's beginning, who's struggling, who maybe hasn't found those next steps and wants to, because certainly they're not easy. And it's all about taking steps, taking steady steps forward and kind of finding your future, you know, moving out of your present reality into one you envisage. And certainly for me, I could say, quite honestly, there's been almost like miracles. Like when I look back now, not to sort of overplay it, but just the fact of having had the career I dreamed of when I was a teenager and having had all kinds of opportunities and successes and failures. The failures are important, of course, because without them, you can't succeed. You can't go through what you have to learn and then go on to succeed, because each failure teaches you. All that corny stuff is true, by the way. And if you kind of learn to embrace that, or even reluctantly embrace it, then you keep progressing, you keep learning, and eventually you find, lo and behold, a miracle happens. You improve, you might go through the next doorway into some new realm of working or meeting people or what have you. So this is the book. I'm going to show you that in a second. And, you know, this is like the first comic, which there's sketches in that book that relate to this comic when I was trying to work it out. This is from 1978. So the next year this got published. But in the book, 1977, I was working. This is a cover I did for Andromeda magazine, which is a black and white comic published by Ron Van Leeuwen of the Silver Snail comic shop. And he had a distribution company called Andromeda later, the same name. But this comic was called Andromeda. And I did this frontispiece for it. And I did this story here, Exile of the Eons. And that was a whole journey and adventure. It was like a black and white comic when black and white comics were popular. I think it was around the era of the Teenage Mutant Ninja, whatever it is. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And yeah, so that was like the beginning. And then I went on to do many, these are just random things I pulled off my bookshelf, but this was a spirit cover I did, or a series of covers I did for Boom, Green Lantern, Planet of the Apes series. This was Iron Man, a series called Iron Metropolitan, and there's a bunch of different covers. And, you know, I sort of reflect over this. The teenager that I was would not have imagined that I could move into all this stuff. And in fact, that was the whole problem. It's like finding that's glaring, finding the doorway into how do I get from back there to where I want to get to. And it's all about finding steps. So there's lots more here, but that gives you the basic idea. But, you know, when I look through this book, I think, wow, back then I had no idea where to go. I was living in Ottawa. I was in my little room in my parents' house going to high school. And I just vividly remember, you know, we had things like no air conditioning. I'm sharing all this personal stuff with you, but it's like we had no air conditioning, sweltering in the summer nights in August, you know. I'd be in my room drawing and kind of trying to figure out the next steps. I mean, back then, I guess it sounds very old-timey to newer listeners, but Back then, you know, there's no internet, no social media, no way of connecting with people, no way of even hearing other people's testimonies other than perhaps reading fan magazines and things like that that I occasionally came across. And where I lived in Ottawa, there was not much of that even available. It was really living there before I moved to Toronto and had access to more magazines and comics and things that were talking about and around the whole business. Back where I lived in this era, I was just working on the comics that I had, which were like Jack Kirby comics, DC comics, a smattering of Marvel comics. But what I got into was drawing. And this was one of my earlier sketchbooks. Living in my parents' house, I was inadvertently following the advice that I later got from my art hero mentor that I always mention, Alex Toth. And later he wrote me by postcard and said, "Son, get a sketchbook." I can hear his voice. "Get a sketchbook and keep it privately. Sketch in it as often as you can, preferably every day. And don't show it off to anybody. It's your own private kind of, I don't know if he said this, but your own private proving ground," which is what I'd call it. It's like a test bed where you just try out stuff and you have this private place where you succeed and fail. So in other words, you push yourself out of your comfort zone and you just really go for it. And that's, to me, back then, I stumbled across this without knowing it, this concept of that idea of a sketchbook. So in the modern Instagram era, you have a lot of people who do these very glossy, perfect, fancy sketchbooks like, "Ooh, look, here is another perfect drawing and another perfect drawing. Aren't you supposed to be envious of all my perfect drawings?" But really, that's not, I mean, that's one idea. You can do whatever the hell you want, but that's not the only way you can do a sketchbook. If you use your own sketchbook and you don't have that incessant urge to show it off to everybody, what you can do with it is just use it to push yourself. And like I said a moment ago, inadvertently, my own teenage self, I stumbled across this without even knowing it. And I did that in this book and others, you know, and sketches. I mean, I was in my room like a mad wizard just trying stuff. I'm sure some of you out there listening to me, I hope, are like that too. You're the quirky person who just goes your own way and wants to follow that kind of weird guiding light inside you that says, follow the muse and discover who you can be. And so anyway, in this faded, cracking book, I see all the archaeological, it's like an archaeological dig, all the evidence of my former self. I've got here a trip to Toronto, airbrush. I think I went there and I was visiting Ron Van Leeuwen, who was very kind to me and stayed at his place. And he was getting me to do this comic I showed you, Exile of the Eons. And I was working on it. And I think I went to visit him on the Greyhound bus, you know, and he let me stay there in the summer. So this book, I was just experimenting. And I pasted in later all kinds of, you can hear it cracking. I glued in and pasted in all kinds of stuff. Scribbly sketches of various things. I was very much into Barbarians and Frazetta. It was like kind of an unholy mix of influences because I had everything from Frazetta to Chris Foss, who is a British paperback cover artist. And these are sketches where I was trying to figure out what finally became this cover, which is, I finally figured out, and it was a real like pushing through the uncomfort zone into the, you know, because I was trying to figure out, like, how do I do this painting? How do I design it? How do I stage it? What was the concept? You know, I finally did an airbrush acrylic painting on masonite. And I think I unfortunately sold it years and years ago to some collector out there somewhere. And so, excuse me, so I don't possess that. But here's me working out sort of how to do it. And mind you, I didn't have access to any professional knowledge, so I didn't know really what you did exactly. I was just kind of fumbling around. So these are my attempts at concept sketches. I was trying to work out the concept and poses. So I had some idea earlier for you know, some kind of trooper. And I think it, like, probably Ron had said, or somebody had said, just do whatever you want, just make a cool cover. So it's like that thing they do on covers now on comics where it doesn't have to match the interior story. You just have to have something eye-catching that people will buy. So I was working on that, and here's one for that frontispiece here that I have here. This It's kind of like a navigator guy. And they ran the type over this. And so here's me working out the sketch in my book, probably at night or in the afternoon after school at night. Here's like a random ballpoint pen drawing of some kind of rock formation, probably in school. I must have cut that out of a piece of paper because I'd sit there in high school, bored out of my skull-rino, you know, with that ballpoint pen, like shading. This is me working out pages for the comic Exile of the Eons. That's like page. Just bear with me, people. I don't know, it's in here. I recognize the page. There we go. It's me trying to work out that page, if you can see that. And I X'd out this one and changed the hand pose. Is it good or bad? I don't know. It's very fussy, and I later disavowed strongly rendered comics, but I'm going to keep paging through here. My worst sketchbook ever, because why did I call it that? Because I see a mix of everything here. I see some real good flashes of great stuff, but I also see a lot of incredibly painful, confused, fumbling forward, trying to figure out what the hell to do, how to draw. The figures are not good. And, but you know what it was, people? It's perseverance. I just kept going because, you know, I had that burning bug in the back of my head going, somehow, some way, you can find your way forward and figure out how to do this. And that was like, I'd lapse back and sometimes into depression or laziness or passivity. But then that bug would come back and say, you know, you just got to keep going. You got to keep trying. And you sort of rise back up off the mat, as it were, and just have at it again. It's like you go forward and attack and keep trying. And these were all like, I'd come home and just start sketching with a marker, not even knowing what the heck I was doing. And a lot of them in this section of this book are me fumbling around with ideas for this Andromeda story that I did, that I showed you. There might have been other ideas. I've got scribbly little notes that I could try and decipher, but and they're little ideas for stories, you know, and just endless little bits and pieces, but they weren't really put together, and it shows my state of mind back then. I guess here I was trying to work out a story, Orbit City, and had some half-baked idea for a story. Here I was drawing my own hand, trying to practice, which is a good thing to do. It's the same hand. It's still here. Still drawing, although it's my other hand. I draw with my left hand. So that's why all the drawings are of my right hand, because I'm a lefty. But, you know, the point was to just keep going and see where you get to. And sometimes I had flashes of things that, looking now, I like better. Like this is a very, I'll hold it up, it's stuck. It's a very Frazetta-esque, barbarian-esque pen drawing. I like that better. And might have even done that in class. I can't remember exactly. Kind of, you know, in between nodding off and trying to listen to the teacher. I do these things. This was like an acrylic, little acrylic painting on a piece of card. And I later taped this in here to kind of assemble it. February 20th, 1977, and I just grab acrylic paint and start mashing around with the brush, trying to do science fiction-y things. This is like a logo for I was at a high school called Sir Robert Borden High School, and this is a logo for some kind of magazine they did. I don't remember exactly. This is like a ballpoint pen drawing. It's kind of gotten faded with marker, but I like it. Keep going. There's a lot of pages in this book, so I don't know if I'll get through all of it. And more random notes. Some kind of fight scene. Kirby-like, I wrote down. See, even back then I was going on about Kirby. I wrote down, I can't get it in the frame because I've got a bookshelf here. But I was trying to draw fight scenes and compose the different silhouettes, you know, how they overlap of the figures, like how should it look. And I wrote down electric gloves, Kirby-like. I was all over Jack Kirby's New Gods and all that stuff. This is some kind of comics notes. It's very quirky, isn't it? But you have to be determined with this stuff. This is a newspaper, or a magazine clipping, probably from like Time magazine or something like that back then. And I liked the silhouette of this. This is one of those planetarium projectors, Zeiss projectors that would project the pictures of the planets. I thought it looked cool, like a spaceship, but do they even have those anymore? I think they got rid of them. And trying to see what's useful here to show people. I mean, my overall point in making this video is just to encourage people that, listen, if I can go forward from a sketchbook like this, which like I said, is very intermittent, if I can do that, you can. Really what it's about is finding the next steps, constantly finding some way to keep practicing and find the next steps forward and find specific things to work on. And that's kind of what I did eventually. It was in a period after this that I twigged onto that concept. But in this phase, I was just in the keen enthusiasm, like I got to go home and draw. And sort of drawing barbarians and drawing science fiction things, you know. And at least that carried me through into a later phase where I realized, okay, you got to really break this down, slow down, study it, and get into that frame of mind. This was I was trying to work out how to illustrate Starship Troopers. This is from the next year. It says 1978, May. And it's all about these space soldiers fighting these bugs. And here I'm getting closer, I guess, to the actual final cover. And this is May 29th, 1978. So I guess I was working out the details and getting the pose. I guess I got onto this idea of the noble hero in front of the crashed spaceship kind of theme, which I thought was dramatic. Because again, you want to get people to actually buy the book, you know, the book. So here I was getting into studying. I have this engineering textbook, which I'm going to show in another video. My mother got it for me from the library used book sale of all things. And it was an engineering textbook, but it had some really great chapters on, you know, things like perspective drawing, forms, intersections, and all that kind of great stuff. So I was working off it, trying to study what they were doing and do my own versions of it. So this would be like the intersection of a cylinder hitting a cube. I was trying to do a perspective drawing of it. And this would be like 2-point perspective. I don't know how well this is showing on this video, but and I did a bunch of these in here. So here I was trying to draw a spiral staircase, and from perspective, challenging myself, and going back sometimes to these strange doodlings of heroic figures doing who knows what. I mean, it's the mind of an 18-year-old. What do you expect, people, right? Like, you're not going to have consistency. It's starting all over like a, you know, a liquid on a hot cast iron pan. I like that one, that guy there with his helmet. He looks kind of severe and sincere, and this guy's kind of fun. Winston Smith, 1984. So I was drawing him back then because I'd been reading the book. Later ended up illustrating it. You go figure, you know. Later did this whole book, which people have seen, but why not? It's kind of relevant, you know. Ended up illustrating this whole thing, and which was fun. Challenge, big challenge. That's another whole video, really. How do you illustrate this thing, which is not really that visual? Kind of getting out to the end of this now, but it's a whole book of all these kind of attempts. You know what it is? It's attempts, and I just kept attempting. It's like a bug in, you know, I like these analogies. It's like a bug in the summer June light banging itself against the screen door because it wants to get inside. You just keep going. And these are like a gouache, I think, little scribbles I did, and I pasted them in afterwards. This is my attempt here at a Chris Foss spaceship. I'm going backwards now, but this is like me alternating into the attempting to do some kind of Frazetta-esque thing. I had those books published by Ballantine, which I loved. And this is like a cool airbrush scribble I did, kind of freehand, as they say. This is a Chris Foss inspired spaceship, And this one was, I was reading Larry Niven's Neutron Star book, science fiction book. And I guess I was attempting a cover. So, you know, really, what am I saying here? I'm saying keep going. I'm saying be your own quirky self. Follow your inner lights. Learn from the outer lights, because nowadays there's so many more great things and free resources, really. You don't even really need to go to a school. You just go to online, all kinds of stuff. And you can sometimes even pay for online schools that are done by individual pro artists. I may even offer something like that. I'm thinking about that. But there's so many ways to develop. But I mean, those are outer things. What you really need is the inner drive to just believe that you can do it. It takes a kind of faith. Do I want to call it religious? I don't know. But if you put in the work and you put in the practice and perseverance, you can really draw a new force to yourself, and then you unfold more. And I think anybody who's developed their ability, whether it's in music, art, writing, anything creative, they're going to probably have a testimony somewhat like that. So I'm going to end this here. I mean, that's my testimony after, like I said at the beginning, almost 50 years of doing this. And I don't feel like stopping anytime soon, because, you know, you create something, it makes you feel new, young, you entertain yourself, and you surprise yourself. So I guess my somewhat sentimental testimony is just keep going and don't be discouraged. I mean, you're going to have defeats at times. You're going to have drawings like in here, you know, things that you just later cringe at. But that's in the nature of things. You can't get around the fact that you have to just keep going and progress upwards. I think of a baby, right? They learn just everything step by step, and it's in the nature of things. They can't even really move. They learn to control their hands. They learn to roll over and move their arms and limbs, and then they learn to maybe sit up. Then they eventually crawl, and then they eventually toddle and bonk back down on their hands and knees, and eventually at some point they figure out balance and walk, or toddle, walk, and then they run. And it's like, if you want to learn to run and be a pro, you have to go through the stages. And that's what I see here when I look back at all this stuff I did. I was propelled by sheer enthusiasm, which you do have to have. Something, you know, draw something you love, write something you love. It's all that stuff. They say write what you know, write what you love too. Draw what you love. And that's I think good advice. And that will get you through those stages, going from being the baby that's just newborn to running and going towards really what you're aiming for. So I hope that was helpful, and thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you in the next video. Bye for now.